It's just hard. It's like, some days I feel like I'm walking in deep mud in boots that are 2 sizes too big. I'm what's considered dually diagnosed, which means that I have a mental health diagnosis and an addiction diagnosis. And my mental health diagnoses have changed over time. And when I first sought help, my son was 3 years old. I started seeking help for him because I thought he was acting out. And I went to see a therapist and told him all about my son. And I said, well, when do you want me to bring him in? And he says, well, why don't you just come back next week? And so I did. And then at the end of the session, I said, well, when do you want me to bring Sean in? And he said, why don't you just come back next week? And I stayed for 14 years. I've been so blessed to have a psychiatrist that understood, deeply understood the unique ways that that mental illness presents.
Okay, let's get over there to the big bad organization.
The self-medicating. It was cocaine in the 70s, and then fairly recently, 7 years ago, I was involved with methamphetamine. I used just enough to keep myself high all day long. It allowed me to blame my otherness on the drug and not on the snakes in my head, right? And I'll tell you what, it's a lot easier to admit you have an addiction. It's a lot more socially acceptable than to say that my brain is different. So for me, when things weren't going well, I could blame it on my addiction. She handed me her meds, and I handed them back to her. Anytime I got clean and sober, I never got better, you know? But with each effort, with each time I tried, I got a little bit of care, a little more insight into the way I was put together. And it's absolutely important to practice radical acceptance of who you are and where you've been, because if you see it as an amazing ability to adapt and be resilient, and every single person on the face of this earth struggles to find their place, their community, their belonging. And for people that grow up without that and who have idealized what belonging is, then a gang or a man that rapes you constantly but keeps you completely and chaotically involved in a system that you feel like you have a part in, or drug activity where every minute of your time is in protecting your stuff from being stolen, planning to get the drugs, getting the money to get the drugs, getting the drugs, or getting high. That keeps you encapsulated in a world where you have a sense of belonging, even though it's really an aberrant adaptation. It is an adaptation. The reality is that most people that use drugs have some kind of trauma in their lives. And I like the word trauma rather than the mental illness, because there's such a stigma to being ill, you know, and you don't have a choice about it. But I think that in the future way of dealing, speaking as a clinician, I think that the wave of the future as far as dealing with addictions and mental illness is going to be a dual diagnosis approach. What we can do is we can enter in at one point, and we can enter in from addiction and use that entry spot to begin to introduce a new way of living. There are hundreds of thousands of people like me in the world today. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. By the most conservative estimates, they say that the most conservative estimates are 1 out of every 7 people have some form of diagnosable mental illness. Others say 1 out of 4. You know, there's a built-in community for people with addictions. There's recovery. Everything is recovery this, recovery that, recovery this. I can plug in. There are social events there are around addiction. There are treatment programs. There are varying levels of treatment programs. Whereas mental illness, there's only hospitalization and medication. For me, the way I would describe approaching my addiction is that as I got, the more wellness I had on board, then if I got so far in therapy where I was feeling like I could feel my legs underneath me, then I could give up a little bit of the addiction. And then I'd get a little bit better, and then I could give up a little bit more of the addiction. And it got to the point where I was firmly on solid ground, and I felt like I had the tools I needed I practice radical acceptance around my symptomology and who I am as a unique and wonderful, miraculous being, and I engaged my intellect and all these other things I had on board, then I could walk away from the addiction. And I believe I've walked away from addiction forever.